have a little extra time, so.
This wasn't on the agenda, and this is brand new, so why are we getting it? Just
Well, we're going to do discussion only here in the work session because we have time. All right, go ahead, Tom. Are you ready, Joel?
Yeah, we should be live.
Okay, go ahead, Tom.
So one thing I'd like to say about the item you just voted on is that there was one thing that we were thinking and two that we weren't that contributed to what we've done in the remodeling. We knew that we needed to make repairs to City Hall, especially the electrical, because we were worried about fire. When we started that process of cleaning up, especially the wiring in the attic, we found that there were extension cords running from the room where the electrical panel was, out in power and ceiling fans and all kind of stuff that you're not supposed to do. And in addition to that, we were having significant response issues in the network, especially on Bobby's side of the building. And so the two things that are different about City Hall that you would not know is that we've replaced a lot of the electrical and a lot of the Cat 5 that's in the building. And what that's going to do is make that building usable for a lot longer. A couple of things that we didn't know is we didn't know that COVID was coming, and we still don't know what that's going to do to us economically, but I would say, if I had to make a guess right now, that any plans that we have to build a new City Hall just got pushed into the future even farther than they were 3 months ago, which was probably out in the future pretty good. So we're going to have to live with this City Hall potentially for years. Another thing that we didn't know related to COVID is we leased the old library to a tenant who now may be in that building longer, even though they have not told me that. I'm just sort of, looking at the way the wind's blowing, and I know that they are doing an internal review of their building plan because of the move to teleworking that has occurred, and evaluating again whether they need that much building. And if they decide to change, they're going to have to re-engineer, re-architect that building if they downsize it. And they haven't decided to. In fact, they haven't even had the meeting to start working through that. But I know from talking with them that we could be without use of that library for even longer than we initially thought. So when we look at the money that we just spent, what we were doing was really not only making it safer, but buying time, maybe years, that we're going to be in that building. So I don't know how you view what we did, but I know that the folks that work there have been very positive about the change from an aesthetic standpoint, cleanliness, and just, being more pleasant to work. But just practically, we may be in that building a long time. So I wanted you to have that in mind as we go forward. All right, we have a meeting coming up with Carroll County, and that meeting is to discuss SPLOST, Carroll SPLOST. So the last SPLOST, I think, was in the summer of 13. And does that sound right? Summer. I think that's when 13. It was voted on, and it was supposed to be voted on again in March, if I remember. But that referendum got bumped. I'm not sure what we're doing now. Are we in a June rescheduled date still? Is there still a June 19, or is it May 19?
On the SPLOST election, I think it's November.
Yeah, I think it got moved to November.
Is it all the way out to the general referendum?
Yes.
Okay, so anyway, we have to put together a SPLOST list with Carroll County, and we're going to have that meeting soon. And so what you have before you is some specific project detail. The second page is a summary of the two SPLOST programs that we're in today, one for Carroll, one for Douglas. In the third page is a proposed Carroll County SPLOST category list. One thing to note, when you look at Carroll and Douglas, is they are very dissimilar. And they're dissimilar not in the sense that they aren't the same in their structure. They both have categories. But what's dissimilar is that one assigned dollar amounts to the categories and one did not. And I'm hoping that we'll continue in that vein with Carroll, that we have a category list with no limits to what can be spent in each category. But right now, and that's the way it is now, but we won't know that till we get into it. Because of that, I have this, ballpark some numbers, round numbers for the values of some of these projects. And you can see that just the Carroll-only portion is almost $50 million. But the SPLOST is only going to be worth 6 or 7 or 8, depending on how the virus affects the economy. So there's a lot more that we have talked about as a group than we could ever fund in a single SPLOST cycle. But I wanted to get your feedback from this, because if there's a big ticket item that you want to have included in the SPLOST or be considered, and it doesn't fit into one of these 7 categories on the third page, then we need to bring it up today. And the only one that I took off from last time is the 8th category, which was a green space land allocation. My thinking is with 7 or 8 million in projected revenue and 50 million in expenses, that we're probably not going to be buying vacant land. That may not be true. We may look back and wish that we had it on here, but I think we have a lot more to spend money on than we're going to have money. So comments, questions, observations about the list, or what you would or wouldn't want to see on here?
Bridge, I don't remember that one.
Yeah, if you go to Ackworth, they're probably the most recent example of a pedestrian bridge from one side. They have a 2-sided downtown like we do, split by a railroad, and they crossed it with a pedestrian bridge.
Bridge.
$1 million bridge.
Have you seen
I
it?
saw
Yes,
that.
I've seen it. It's right there at Fusco's. Water treatment plant, where does that rank in the hierarchy of priorities?
So the water treatment plant now is crucial in a functional sense. The old plant that we're operating is held together by coat hangers and duct tape, and it's a matter of time until we have additional failures like we've experienced in the time that I've been here. It's a single basin plant, which means that we have a programmed downtime every month when we clean the basin, because we don't have a second redundant capability to produce water. So every month for a short period of time, we have to pull all of our water from Carroll County Water Authority. And in addition, every time we have a system failure, it's generally debilitating. There's very little redundancy in the plant anywhere else in addition to the basin. So the combination of the age and condition of the equipment and the fact that there's not redundancy doesn't put us in a very good position long term. What we have done, in addition to moving ahead with designing first an upgrade of the plant and then realizing that we really needed to build a new plant, is we've continued to pursue other opportunities for additional water. or to buy water from other sources. So we've talked to Carroll County Water, we've talked to Douglas County Water, we've talked to another water system. We've looked at pulling water from other reservoirs, from other rivers, from water that we control and don't control. We've gone to other cities nearby and talked to them about pulling water from their reservoirs. We were told that they liked us, that we were friends, but we weren't that good of friends. So, you know, we've pursued that pretty heavily, and at this point, we're going to face a choice between either a huge investment in money, build a new plant that we cannot supply adequately. So we can build a 3 MGD plant, but we're only going to have 1.5 MGD of water. We can't get more water out of our resources than what we're doing. So we're either going to do that, or we're going to contractually obligate ourselves to some other provider. So we're getting close to a real fork in the road. We're either going to build a plant that's going to be extremely expensive, or we're going to contract to buy water that's going to be extremely expensive. That's where we're headed, unless somebody sinks a well and we get a 1,000-gallon-a-minute well someplace, which, we're not anticipating, so.
I think what he may be pointing out is that you still have it on the SPLOST list as though we're going to build it, and it's $18 million of this.
Yep.
Are we getting to the point where it's time to have a frank conversation about which of these paths we're going to take? And we're going to have to talk about that when we get ready to do this SPLOST. Is that really your greater point here?
Yeah, where we are now with the engineering is we've stopped the design. We are talking to a property owner about land for the new facility, and we're waiting to see if there is a possibility of someone donating the land to us for the facility. And until that decision is made, we've asked the engineers to stop. But even if we were to be given the land, we're still going to have this fork in the road conversation about, do we want to stay in the water business? Do we want to halfway stay in the water business, or do we want to get out of the water business?
As much as I like a lot of the projects on here, I think that particular project, that kind of infrastructure is critical. So we don't want to spend this $6 to $8 million of SPLOST until we've made that decision. And if we're going to go with a water treatment plant, then most of that SPLOST needs to be devoted to that because it's critical. And if we're not going to go with a water treatment plant, the SPLOST needs to go toward items that will free up general fund money, because we're going to spend general fund money on water somewhere else.
All right, so one thing that I did on here that I don't like, that I was thinking about today, is the third and the fourth column says primary source and alternative source. And really what I should have said was alternative 1 and alternative 2. So I've listed all of these as if the Carroll SPLOST is the first alternative and something else is the second. We could really do all of this without SPLOST money if we had to, because let's face it, if we get to the referendum and the voters vote no, we're going to operate with no SPLOST, right? And we could do a GO bond, but we can't do all of this with a GO bond. And we could do some of this with a GFA loan, but not all of it. And we can do some of this with a tax allocation district, but not all of it. So it may be that we can't even do all of this with all of those things. But I agree with you that at some point soon, we're going to make a decision about how we're going to indebt the city. And we're either going to do it with GFA loans, with the tax allocation district, with a GO bond, or some other mechanism where we get into a long-term contract with a provider. really hard decisions coming up, though.
What kind of time frame we talking about here?
During this budget, during this summer, we're gonna have to decide what we're doing.
For the SPOST, we need to tell the public what we're going to spend the money on before they go vote on it.
Well, yeah.
Right, and I agree with you. The columns probably should have been alternative 1 and alternative 2, because it can be a little, because all of this won't be part of the SPLOST, but these are a heads up on some of the projects that we are going to be meeting with the county on, I think on the 20th, is that right? Something like that. So what we're doing here is making you aware of kind of what we're looking at and asking if there are other projects that you think should be included in that SPLOST conversation when that begins. And of course, you're right, Councilman Young, as we get a little further down the road, we will have to delineate how we intend to spend those SPLOST funds before it gets on the ballot, but that's not kind of where we're at right now. So does anybody have any other projects that they, or any questions about these projects, clarification?
The underpass under the North Loop for the trail system, that's engineered into the thing, but I think we still have to pay for that.
Right.
Is that on here, Tom?
It's not.
It would be in a
It's about
category.
400 grand too, isn't it, Sarah? The
think
box
that's-
culvert under the north bypass, wasn't it 375 or 400?
For the trail plan.
For the basic law.
Yeah, so we can add that to this.
Yeah, well,
That
maybe we
wouldn't-
could fit it into one of
It
the...
wouldn't add a category, it would just
Yeah.
add money to it.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so the general county SPLOST, I think, was always planned for November. Best of my recollection, it was always going to be there. The E-SPLOST was going to be in March. Is the E-SPLOST in the June?
I think it'll be on May 19th.
I think that's
Or
right
June.
for the East Lost.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
June
Is it
19th?
June?
Because we got moved. We got moved to May, then we got moved to June.
Yeah.
And, you know, like you said, it matters whether people pass this, and this is my only concern about it. The educational SPLOST doesn't expire, I believe, for about 2 years. They put it on very early. That's not an advantage to us who need the county SPLOST, because the county SPLOST is expiring, and it's in June, and they're going to vote on a penny tax in June, and then we're going to have another penny tax on the ballot in November. That's not a good plan. But, you know, maybe it'll work out okay, but that's been my biggest concern, is the E-SPLOST should have been delayed, and it should have been the county SPLOST that came up first.
Yeah, I mean, there's no denying that that's going to be harder to see them, and he has pointed out that there is a possibility that it won't get approved, but you point that out correctly. Anybody else? All right, Tom?
All right, so let's talk about a perfect world. So the economy recovers, and we come close to adding 500 accounts per year for the next 5 years, like we've talked about. So item 9 would be funded through a loan and the revenue from the water sewer system. The first item in item 9 and all of item 8 potentially could be funded through a tax allocation district. And number 7, the first item, could be a tax allocation district. This is all in a perfect world where the economy is really humming and Villa Rica is hot, and we're adding hundreds of new accounts per year, plus all the commercial that would be associated with that. So we get up to items 1 through 6. So we haven't done, I don't know, have we ever done a GO bond here, David? Maybe
No.
back in the day, no. So the way a GO bond works is you issue bonds, let's say for $10 million, and you pledge property tax against that. And so $10 million might cost you, say, 1.5 to 2 mills to pay that back over the life of the bonds. What typically makes a community interested in a GO bond is recreation. Communities don't typically vote to impose taxes on themselves for road improvements or buildings. So one of the one of the forks in the road again that we're going to face is if we do a GO bond and SPLOST gets approved, what goes in which? The SPLOST in the GO bond are successful sort of for the same reasons, which is recreation. So if we can't do both, then, and we do the SPLOST and we do recreation out of the SPLOST, then you're looking at items 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 is not having a funding source. So the only way that we have a shot at doing all of those or most of those is to do both. And that would be very, very difficult to pass a penny E-SPLOST, a penny SPLOST, and a 2 mil GO bond. See what I'm saying? So we've made it's like we've made this really big shopping list and we've gone to the store and then we said, okay, how much money do we have? And then we start working from the top of the list, and when we run out of money, we're done. And I think that practically, not only is that where we're headed, but it's the top of the list that we're going to do that with. Because there is the possibility that we can grow the account base enough to do number 9, and that we can generate enough commercial development to do 7 and 8 with a TAD. But 1 through 6 are going to be really difficult to do in their entirety. And so in my mind, what gets pushed is the new buildings. It's item 4. Gets pushed maybe an entire SPLOST cycle or even longer, because a GO bond cycle is even longer than a SPLOST cycle. A SPLOST cycle is 6 years. A GO bond at a minimum is 10 years, but probably 15 or 20. So as you're looking at this list, you may not immediately be thinking about things to add to it, but you need to be thinking about what's the get out of this. If we're going to spend the very little capital money that we have in the next 6 years, what's going to give us the most bang for the buck? Is it recreational capability? Is it moving the Avante building and being able to rework downtown? Is it connectivity between the two sides of the downtown with a bridge? Is it a new city hall complex and consolidating PD and court and city hall all into a facility? Is it reworking Punkintown so that it's safe? Is it the Welcome Center at Butterballs? You know, which of those gives us the most bang for the buck?
I think those are excellent, sort of thought processes about how you would evaluate those, but I really think that what would be most helpful is if you or staff or a combination were to present sort of a case for each of these. Because, for instance, the municipal complex, I mean, there's a lot to think about other than just have you unified or put all of these things in one building. You freed up space downtown. You now have more retail space. You're going to be able to sell some of that. You're going to change the dynamic. My point is that it's more than just some sort of a summary discussion. the impact can be much larger than we may see just by going through this list here. So I think that we should approach it from that standpoint. Go ahead, Danny.
I didn't think the Pumpkin Town Road was an option that we could avoid. According to our city attorney, it's something that had to be done and had to be done immediately. So I don't know how we put that off.
But didn't we have an option about how we did it?
You do. I think that's a policy decision you'll make as to how you're going to attack the problem, but agreeing with Mr. Carter, it's something the city has to address in the very near future.
We have the engineer looking at two different ways of making it safe.
So that would also be part of that discussion as well. Mr. Young, did you have something? Okay. All right, Tom, go ahead.
Okay, so because we don't a lot. So we've had a conversation with the school system, and they would like to demo the elementary school gym in a couple of years. And we need that capacity. Even now, we fully utilize the two gyms during basketball season. So that's an issue, and if we don't replace it and they knock down the building, we would have to seriously scale back the program. Baseball is different from basketball in that its participation is not growing, but we have a potentially great complex that has not been taken care of. We spent a lot of time this winter on the buildings, the restrooms and the concessions building and the dugouts and all that kind of stuff, replace fencing, but the fields don't drain. So we need to spend a good bit of money, and like the argument that we made about redoing the city hall and redoing the courtroom, this year is a good time to do it because we're not playing. So that may come back around. Several folks have brought up to me the need for us to build a track. I would say that that's the last priority of this list. We don't have one. There's not a program there that we're losing, but that would be a positive to the program, to the recreation program as a whole, to add a track around the field. Another thing that's probably the next to last priority is the fact that we practice football on the baseball fields, which if you're a recreation guy, that is a big no-no, right? If we could convert some of the Ingalls property to playable practice fields, that would make a lot more sense, or to go the other side to the Campbell property. But I'd say that's the next to last priority. The top priority is probably soccer. And there's two ways to look at that. One is we need more capacity, we need more fields. But the other consideration is when we build the north bypass, if we're able to also connect the bypass to Rockmart Road through Fullerville, it may be that relocating Fullerville Soccer Complex and turning that commercial would make more sense. In which case we wouldn't be adding soccer fields, we'd be building an entirely new soccer complex somewhere. And remember that while we're talking about this, that the land that wraps the V-Plex is being actively marketed. So there's 70 acres that sits in a L around the V-Plex, between the V-Plex and the Methodist Church, and then between the V-Plex and your house, your old house, and Jerry Talbert's old house. There's 70 acres right there that could be acquired. Another thing that is a consideration is when we build the north bypass, it's going to bisect the 75 acres that we own. Y'all are familiar with that? You made that purchase before I got here. There's 75 acres that sits north of Fullerville Soccer Complex that's going to be cut in half by the road. when that road is built, it's going to make the top half of that parcel accessible by car. Whereas now, if you built anything there, you couldn't drive to it, right? It's not, it doesn't have any access to a road right now. It sits on the back of Reed Plantation. So we could do possibly some soccer there. And then you have one minor possibility, and that would be to reuse the 2 ball fields at Powell Park, which have sat dormant the whole time that I've been here, plus I don't know how long before. So of those, I'd recommend that we do something with soccer first, because that's the program that's growing. That's where we have participation. Basketball would be second, but a new gym is really expensive, and we don't get 12 months out of it readily. And then, we're talking about the other things, which are smaller participation or smaller needs. So questions about any of that?
Basketball, what's the season?
I don't know, Janet, can you help? Is it a lot more than January and February?
How many evenings a week do we use the facility over at the elementary school?
All the time. Play on the weekend, practice at night. It's the practice is what gives you the capacity problem, not the games. Because you want to practice more than once, and every team wants to practice, and you've got to do it after work, and so then younger kids, have time issues that the older kids don't, so then you're jamming all the younger kids into a 6 and 7 o'clock, you know what I'm saying? I mean, it's just a really rigid activity.
I don't know all the facilities that are out there and if they're occupied, most of those evenings and everything, but would it hurt to ask churches that have facilities? The high school, is their season at the same time ours is?
Yes.
So then they're out, but
Middle
is there
schools.
anything else out there that's not being used? Yeah, any of the schools, is it all at the same time? Just seeing if there's anything else out there we can use.
Yeah, right. I've asked before, and there wasn't an available facility, but that doesn't mean that couldn't change. But if you invest in the gym, you're going to run a program. If you're a school, you're going to have a school teams. They're going to practice at the same time.
Any other questions? Comments?
The gym that we're running, we don't have an option on it, do we? I mean, it's too expensive to upgrade or fix. At one time, I thought the school was going to donate that to us.
No, they've let us use it for free, but
And our age for basketball is what?
little guys, I don't know, 6 or
5 or 6,
on up.
The only reason I'm thinking, if soccer is the priority, and that does seem to be the priority in Georgia, I mean, I even look at our own extended family. If we didn't do it, it's not like there's nothing out there. So if soccer's a priority and we can't do as much basketball, there's churches that do upward basketball, they do young kids programs. I think, does FBC still do it? I don't know, Midway used to. It might not totally lock those kids out of being involved in something. I don't know that it's as competitive, but usually 5 and 6 isn't super competitive anyway. So it doesn't mean that it may not be available. I mean, we got to prioritize if we can't do it all.
Yeah, we don't know what the virus is going to do to recreation anyway. We're assuming that everything comes back to normal, what used to be normal. But if it doesn't, then these facilities could continue to do what they're doing today, which is sit empty.
Yeah, but you're not talking forever, right? I mean, we're talking, we don't know how long, but is there anything else in the history of this country or the world that we didn't come back and eventually do and go beyond?
Well, he's not talking about forever.
Yeah.
But as we begin to talk about SPLOST and prioritize, and it's going to look different depending on what happens with the virus, because this is going to come up in November. So, we're not, okay, do you have anything else? I want to wrap it up so we can get a
I'm good.
break in here. Okay, anybody have any other questions for Tom? Any comments? All right, now I will adjourn.